And welcome back, everyone. This is the X Zone, and I am Rob McConnell, coming to you from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. If you would like to send us an email, xzone at xzoneradiotv.com, on all social media sites, X Zone Radio TV. And for all of the programming available on the X Zone Broadcast Network 24/7, 365, visit www.xzbn.net. My guest this hour, X Zone Nation, is Amelia Cotter. She is an author, storyteller, and she has also done a lot of work within the paranormal. So let me see, Amelia, why don't you come on and tell us about your paranormal experiences and why you do what you do?
All right, sounds good. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure.
Oh boy, it's hard to know where to start. So
the beginning is always the best place.
Yeah, right. I have had a number of interesting experiences throughout my life. I got interested in ghosts when I was a kid, going to the library and checking out all of the old books that used to be all lumped into what was then the occult section, where all the cool books were about parapsychology and everything. And then, so I grew up in Maryland, and I had the pleasure of exploring some really interesting abandoned, haunted places near where I grew up, and my parents kind of encouraged me to do so safely. They thought it was kind of neat themselves, so my parents encouraged me to explore this house that was close to where my dad worked in Baltimore County, Maryland. He worked at a restaurant on what had been My Lady's Manor, owned by Lord Baltimore. So there were a bunch of houses on the property dating from like the 17 and 1800s, and one of them was affectionately known locally as Walter's House. And I got a chance to walk through some of the safer parts of the house in the daytime and check it out. I was a history buff too, and I think that's what my parents wanted to instill in me, was a love and an affinity for history, and feeling lucky to have some of these places that were still standing that were many hundreds of years old. And I live in Chicago now, so we don't really see that out here in the Midwest.
Right.
In any case, I fell in love with this house called Walter's House, and that kind of started me on a lifelong track of being interested in ghosts and ghost stories and people's personal experiences, mostly in a positive way. Some people come to it, I think, because they have terrifying experiences. They grow up in a haunted house or something like that. I became more like romantically fascinated with ghost stories, and that's kind of carried me through to today, where I've written books and done a lot of research.
Right.
And been involved with a show called the RIP Files, which is a paranormal investigation reality show, and gotten to explore a lot of different places mostly around the U.S., but in some other parts of the world as well.
All right, some of your books include This House, the True Story of a Girl and a Ghost, Maryland Ghost, Paranormal Encounters in the Free State, as well as you did a children's book entitled Breakfast with Bigfoot. Before I get into asking you about your children's book, Breakfast with Bigfoot, what has been the most scariest experience that you have ever had?
That is such a great question, and sometimes, depending on my mood or what's going on that day, my answer will change. Sometimes I'm like suddenly struck with a memory of something incredible that happened, but one thing that stands out in my mind was when I visited the Patapsco Female Institute, which is in Ellicott City, Maryland. When I was filming the RIP Files, we spent a night there, and that was a girls' finishing school that was built in the 1830s, and it's been partially restored, and they do outdoor theater there and weddings and all kinds of stuff. And there was only one reported death on the property, and we weren't sure how haunted it was actually going to be when we went to film there. It was just a really cool location. And it was one of the only times that, so I haven't seen too many things. I feel like I did see a ghost when I was a kid, but otherwise I haven't seen too many things with my own eyes. But I actually saw what people would normally describe as shadow figures, which were like these but they weren't like people-shaped shadow figures. They were like these gelatinous masses that were moving along the outer walls of this building. And it was one of the only times I had ever felt like a dark kind of presence, not evil or demonic or any of the buzzwords that people sometimes use, but definitely something that did not have any kind of good intentions and didn't seem to be like a human spirit.
So do you believe in ghosts if you haven't seen one?
I do. I
Why?
do believe in ghosts. I don't have a definition for what I think ghosts are. So we use the word ghost or spirit or apparition or demon or whatever to describe a number of different types of things that we see. And I feel like the more I've experienced throughout my life, the less I understand the activity that I'm looking at. But I believe they exist. I just don't think I understand what they are. I think we also tend to look at ghosts and spirits through a religious lens, and I try to see them as just something that is some kind of phenomenon. And I did see a ghost, I believe, when I was a kid, and that was your classic sort of, full body apparition in front of my eyes type of experience. But other things, have kind of gotten to me, just strange dreams, all sorts of things that go along with, like, when you're investigating or studying or researching, even when I've written books and experiences that I've had in my own home while I was writing, a book or a story in an otherwise non-haunted location. And it's just made me wonder. It's definitely brought more questions than it has answers.
So I'm trying to understand where your belief in ghosts come from. I don't understand. Was it the apparition that you saw when you were a young girl? Was it your love for history, and was it your love for reading books? Or where did the desire to do what you're doing today come from?
I think for me, I've always been fascinated by ghost stories.
Okay.
So I think that's where it started for me when I was a kid. I read the scary stories, tales by Alvin Schwartz when I was a kid. I loved to be scared. I loved scary movies, the ones I was allowed to watch. And I enjoyed being scared. I grew up in a small town in Maryland, so I had a few options when I was a teenager. One of them was to, party and act out, and I wasn't cool enough to party with the cool kids, so I was friends with the people that wanted to go explore graveyards and stuff like that. And I also loved history, and it made me feel connected to history and connected to where I grew up. And so I would go and explore these strange places, and I think my desire to know more about the world and the mysteries of the world sort of was rooted in my love for ghosts and ghost stories. My personal paranormal experiences are kind of secondary to all of that. I know some other folks too, especially out here in Chicago, that have spent their whole lives researching and writing about the paranormal and have yet to have a paranormal experience. They just think it's really freaking cool. And they wish they could, but they haven't. And I think I've had a variety of interesting experiences. I just am unable to define what they are. And my day job, I work over at the Adler Planetarium here in the city. So I spend a lot of time around astronomy and space science. It kind of puts things into perspective when you're thinking about the day-to-day, like what are ghosts and what does ghostly activity mean? For me, it's more fascinating to ask the question than it is to know the answer.
So are ghosts real, or are they what many psychologists are pointing to today? They're figments of the experiencer's imagination.
I believe that ghostly activity is real, and I believe that people's experiences are real. So when somebody describes an experience to me that I may not be able to identify with, I believe that they are telling me the truth, and that what happened to them did happen insofar as they are able to understand what happened. Then I feel we start applying labels. Then we start calling it, well, it had to have been a ghost, or it had to have been a demon, or perhaps it was an alien abduction, or who knows what words we use to describe it. So I use the word ghost to describe like a type of activity or something like that that I or others have experienced.
All right, stand by, Amelia. We've got to take our break. Exonation
Okay.
Amelia Cotter is our special guest. AmeliaCotter.com is her website, and we'll both be back on the other side of this break as we continue here in the X Zone with yours truly, Rob McConnell, from your broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Don't go away. Amelia Cotter is our guest this hour, Exonation, www.ameliacotter.com, and Cotter is spelled Cotter. So, if we haven't been able to put a label on what a ghost is, how do we know when somebody says they have seen a ghost, whether it's because they believe they have seen something and they cannot identify it, so they call it a ghost? And how do we know that what they are actually seeing or what they believe they see is something paranormal and not something that is just unknown to them?
Well, I think we don't. I think we don't know. So I can believe that somebody says that they saw Bigfoot.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that they saw something, They might give me a detailed description of a creature that they saw, and in my heart, I know that they saw, or I imagine that they saw, a black bear standing on two legs, or, something like that. Or it was a hallucination, or there was a statue in the distance. So to your point, I think that we don't always know. And I think it takes those years of collecting stories. So I've heard hundreds and hundreds of stories. Everywhere I go, people have their ghost story ready to share with me. And it's interesting how you build up this database internally where you can sort of tell if somebody is either totally BS, or even if they seem know that something doesn't really follow a pattern of like regular, a regular paranormal activity or something like that. If it sounds a little too Hollywood to yourself, well, they must have been dreaming for part of this, because the even these things in the realm of the paranormal are not, physically possible, et cetera, et cetera.
But I think
when you see
take these stories
of activity,
but if we take these stories and give them credence without actually having proof that what the person is saying is real, are we not enabling at this point?
I think that the stories themselves are very important. So ghost stories, legends, myths, urban legends provide us with something like a modern mythology. And I see there as being separate categories. We have the history of an allegedly haunted location, the actual history and the things that happened there. Then you have the legends and the tall tales and the fables, maybe the sort of urban legendy types of things that might surround the haunted location. That's the mythos. And then you have people's experiences of what they say happened to them there. I think each one of those things holds its own value.
It has a value, but now this is just my own opinion, by giving it credence, by giving it some sort of credibility, by printing the story, by retelling the story, are we doing anything that is worthwhile, or are we just spinning the yarn, keeping the yarn going without any validation of the facts or the events leading up to the to the story?
Well, my goal and my role in the grand scheme of things is not to prove or disprove the paranormal. I'm purely interested in people's experiences and emotions and their connections with ghosts and haunted places, and why we as a society or different cultures are so fascinated with ghosts and spirits and how we relate to them. So that's a little bit more of like the heady stuff and the philosophical end of things, more so than it is deep down in the nitty-gritty of discovering whether or not ghosts really exist, if there's an afterlife, if we can use science to demonstrate paranormal activity and things like that. That is not so much my forte.
But when you write a book, for example, Maryland Ghosts, Paranormal Encounters in the Free State, am I correct in saying that what you're doing is you are just retelling or, republishing the stories that you have heard?
Yeah, so Maryland Ghosts was a very fascinating book to write. So I took the historical pieces of each of the different places. I think there's about 35 different stories in there.
Right.
Talked about the history, talked about the haunted history insofar as what people have reported over the years or the kinds of stories that have been reported. And then I interviewed many different people, including paranormal investigators, including family members, including people that I knew from high school and, et cetera, people that contacted me that were interested in being part of the book, and interviewed them or received their stories of their personal experiences and then shared those. So what it presents to the reader is an opportunity to read about places that are supposedly haunted and then hear people's own stories.
What is your most favorite story from your book, Maryland Ghosts, Paranormal Encounters in the Free State?
Oh boy, that's another good question. I have a personal affinity for the National Museum of Civil War Medicine because I worked there when I was in college, so I'm very familiar with it. And that's in Frederick, Maryland, which is close to where I went to school. And it was a really, really neat building. So the building that the museum was located in was built in 1832, and it was a furniture store and later a coffin manufacturer during the Civil War itself, because the guy who owned the place really wanted to capitalize on making money any way he could. And so the building itself has a storied history, and then they opened up the museum later, much later, obviously, and filled it full of these really neat artifacts, including like the last surviving Confederate surgical tent and other neat things. And I got to work there for a couple of years. Sometimes I was the only person in the building, and it was just a treasure trove of history and creepy mannequins and other kinds of like displays along those lines. And then of course, there were a lot of ghost stories, and that place was different in the sense some places you go to that are supposedly haunted, nobody wants to talk about it. Everybody wants to keep it very hush hush. This place, they fully embraced that it was supposed to be haunted, and they embraced their ghost stories, and they invited people to be part of. I don't know how to describe it, but they brought people into the fold because it did get people interested in history and got, if you could make that personal connection with an object or with an exhibit through a ghost story, then they would go ahead and let you have that. And it was just darn creepy. I remember the alarm at the end of the day was at the other end of the building from the lights, which is like something you would only see in a horror movie. So I would turn off the lights and then run from one side of the building to the other to set the alarm and then get the heck out of there.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, a grown woman. So.
So while you were there, I mean, besides the feeling of creepiness, beside the feeling of that anyone in their right mind would get under those circumstances, did you see or experience anything that you could call paranormal?
I once witnessed a stack of books falling off a shelf in succession, one right after the other. And it looked almost as if the way you would open a book and flip the pages. This stack of books that was back to back, just sort of like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just sort of fell off the shelf onto the floor right in front of me and in front of another person who was working there. And it was accompanied, I've often felt when I've been in the presence of real paranormal activity, I feel this like static electricity go through my body. And I felt it then too. And the person I was with said that they saw a mist, almost like a cigarette or cigar smoke type of mist, float away from the bookshelf after we saw the books fall. And I did not witness that, but I certainly was heavily creeped out. And even creepier than that, even more interesting than that, one time I had to go up to the 3rd floor where the offices were, where I wouldn't normally go, but I needed to do a favor for somebody, and I was there over the weekend. I heard men's voices coming from one of the back offices. And the closer I got to the office, I could still hear the voices. It was like 2 low men's voices murmuring, but you couldn't really understand what they were saying. And even though I could tell the voices were coming from that particular office, even though I got closer, the voices still didn't sound like they were getting any closer. They sort of sounded like they were further and further away. And I've heard people sort of explain ghostly voices in those terms before, where it felt like it was coming from everywhere and nowhere all at the same time. And that was very interesting. It lasted for a while. It wasn't like I heard something briefly and then was able to second guess myself. I could hear them clearly talking, yet I couldn't understand what they were saying.
So how long did you stay at that job?
I worked there for 2 or 3 years.
Wow. And
they opened a sister site at the Pry House Field Hospital Museum, which is on the Antietam battlefield. The Pry House had previously been a stop along the driving tour of the Antietam battlefield, and then they opened it up to the public. And I worked there for a couple of summers, and that was another special experience as well.
All right, Amelia, please stand by. You and I have to take our news break at the bottom of the hour. And Next Nation, Amelia Cotter and I will be back on the other side as we continue talking about the weird, the strange, ghost hauntings, things that go bump in the night, and much more here in the X-Zone from our broadcast center and studio in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. For more information on Amelia, visit our website, www.ameliacotter.com. And don't forget, Cotter is spelled C-O-T-T-E-R. And welcome back, everyone. Amelia Cotter is our guest for this hour. And Amelia, tell us about your book, The House, The True Story of a Girl and a Ghost.
Yeah, so that book explores my experiences from when I was a child that I mentioned at the beginning of the interview with the house, Walter's house, that was, this place of local legend in Baltimore County. And so this house was actually, it started as a young adult book because at some point I didn't realize I was going to segue completely into writing about the paranormal in this way. I thought it would be cool to write some ghost stories, but my career took a different path. And so it was originally a young adult book chronicling my love and fascination for the house, and then my encounter with the ghost that I called Walter, because everybody called any of the ghosts there Walter. And that was when I experienced seeing a young man hanging out of a window, looking down at me from an attic window, and he was completely white. So I could see his body and I could see his clothing and his hair, but all the definition and everything, but there was no pigment, just white, and he had no face. But it wasn't a scary like vacuum of not having a face. It was just sort of like one of those like blank, like a country doll that you sometimes see that are just have those white faces. And I had that static electric feeling that I was describing before. And the feeling that what I was seeing was not something that was scary or threatening to me. And I was actually thrilled. I was 11 years old. I actually felt thrilled and very honored, the way that if you were a bird watcher and you saw a really rare bird, you would get really excited because this was like a life list item or something like that. And for the rest of my life, I've never seen anything quite like that. So I remember that very fondly, and I just really adored it. It was cool that I got to have that experience, such like an intimate experience with a haunted place that felt like it was my own.
Was that the only encounter that you had with Walter?
That was the only one that was visual. I would explore the house and imagine what Walter or his family or these people may have been like who used to live there. There were scattered remnants from, the 1950s through all the way back to like the 1850s, and the house had been built well before that. I remember hearing footsteps in the house, and I had captured an EVP at the time on an old recorder that is long gone, but like an old analog recorder, and I have it in my journals from when I was a kid, saying that a voice had come across on the recorder telling me, take it now, while I was looking at some objects on a shelf. And I ended up taking a mason jar out of the house about a month before it was torn down. There was a car accident that happened in front of the property, and like the guardrail, from the street actually landed on the porch of the house. And I don't know why it seemed to coincide with that, but I wonder if the county or the state, then we're paying attention to the fact that there was this big abandoned house next to the road, and they decided to tear it down, but then it was gone. It was nothing but green grass within a few months. It was very surreal.
Over the years doing this show, I've come to realize something, that the majority of paranormal researchers, especially those who investigate ghosts, are actually historians.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? I wonder if they do go hand in hand, because it allows for that connection to history, that sort of living history, for lack of a better term. I'm not trying to be punny, but like, a living history connection, and an appreciation for history or architecture or old spaces. I've met a lot of people like that.
Do we hear of any new homes or new factories or new buildings that are haunted?
I certainly have out here in Chicago, since there are so many different, even though this is a shorter span of history that Chicago's been around, there's a lot of layers, and there's a lot of, places get torn down and built over. And there are stories about brand new condos or brand new houses that were built over top of other properties, or even like museum areas and things like that have old hauntings in the new building.
Strange. You were a tour guide, let me see, with Chicago Hauntings. And how haunted is Chicago?
Chicago's pretty darn haunted.
Really?
I have to tell you. I do love this city. I've been here for about 10 years, and I feel like I'm fully indoctrinated into the Midwest now, even though I grew up on the East Coast. And Chicago just has a really neat history, and so many cool stories, cool urban legends and things like that, but then also genuinely haunted places. We have some of the like rock star places out here, like Bachelor's Grove Cemetery, and the site of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, and the Hull House where the Devil Baby story originated, and just countless. I could go on and on for a long time. And we got to visit those on the tours. And of course I travel and I talk about, haunted Chicago, haunted Midwest. It's really neat. There's a lot.
While you were a tour guide with Chicago Hauntings, did anything strange or weird or bizarre happen?
Yes. So I didn't usually expect a lot to happen, because you're in a very you're on a big bus with between like 25 and 50 people, and it's very clinical. You get on, you get off, you tell the stories, people take and snap some photos. Sometimes though, other people would have some incredible experiences. They would be in tears. things that they thought that they saw or felt or experienced, photos that they took that they looked at later and then would send to us and say, you won't believe what I found, what I captured. And then I had some interesting experiences too. I was doing it for a while, several nights a week, sometimes more than one time a night, and sometimes like doing the tours after 10 o'clock, after a few tours, it was almost like psychedelic, like be really tired, just kind of on autopilot. And I would have these crazy, crazy lucid dreams when I would get home. And sometimes I would hear things. I lived with my friend at the time over towards the west side of Chicago. And I would hear footsteps shuffling up and down the hallway. I would get up. One time I got up in the middle of the night and went to go use the bathroom. And as I crossed the hallway from my room to the bathroom, I saw a woman standing in our kitchen out of the corner of my eye. And I don't count that as a ghostly sighting because I was deliriously tired and had just woken up, and I saw her out of the corner of my eye. And when I looked again, she was gone. But people had warned me. The other tour guides had sort of like warned me and some of the other, newbies that there were certain places that you could take something home if you weren't careful, and the area around the Hull House was one of those places. So I was always actually there. I figured it can't hurt to be a little superstitious. So they told me never go in the courtyard, and I didn't. Other people had reported being followed home by like a female spirit. So
how do you protect yourself from bringing something home with you after you do a tour?
I would have little things that I would take with me. Mm-hmm. So some sort of a good luck charm or talisman or a piece of jewelry, or I would wear the same ring, same socks, kind of, something like that. And I would sort of, say a prayer beforehand, be in a good mind frame, have a clear frame of mind, and always discourage any energy from following me home. Sometimes I would actually say that out loud, and other times I would just sort of repeat it as a mantra to myself. And then around that too, sometimes I'm a little woo-woo with the candles and incense and stuff like that. So whatever it takes,
Why do you think in the year 2018 so many people are interested in ghosts, hauntings, and things that go bump in the night, and in a world of such, technological marvels?
That's such a good question. My husband was telling me recently that he read somewhere that like paranormal or ghosts or something like that is one of the top Google searches worldwide. I think more people are interested in that stuff now than ever. And I remember I was interested in it because it was like a gateway to all of the cool mysteries of the world. Growing up in a small town, oh wow, what if? And now it's so easy to get a hold of ghost stories or to go on YouTube, and you can spend hours looking at videos of alleged ghosts and whatnot, or listening to EVPs. There's endless TV shows and books.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I feel like it is an outlet. It's an outlet for people to be scared that is, in its own way, if you're not too steeped in it like some of us, it is harmless in its own way. So the world is like a scarier place now than I think that it's ever been. So it's a way to indulge those fears without being in real danger.
So we can say that ghost hunting of today is replacing the roller coaster ride where you actually have to go to the park, you actually have to pay money, you actually have to experience the thrill physically, whereas with ghost hunting you can just go online and get the thrill without doing anything about it. So are we talking about something like an armchair quarterback?
I wonder about that because, and it's hard for me, it's like I don't want to say anything negative about it because I enjoy doing this so much, and so much of my audience are people that enjoy this as well. But at the same time, I think about how there's just a flood of people interested in ghosts, and there's ghost hunters now everywhere you go. All these ghost hunting groups that pop up.
Stand by. We've got to take our final break. X-Zone Nation. Amelia Cotter is our special guest, and her website is www.ameliacotter.com. And we'll both be back as we wrap up this hour here in the X-Zone from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. I'm Rob McConnell. Don't go away. Amelia Cotter is our special guest of this hour, X Zone Nation, www.ameliacotter.com. And Amelia, what part of the entire para-industry do you think plays into the mix or into the formula these days that paranormal sells?
Gosh, it's sort of turned into a monster, with the advent of the many television shows that started like with Ghost Hunters, which was really cool because then people felt like they could have access to information about how to ghost hunt if they were interested in the hobby. And so it brought an awareness to the paranormal field and also to some historic places that have now been restored because people put money into them through things like public investigations and stuff like that. And there have been some positives and there have been a lot of negatives.
Yeah.
I meet a lot of people, like you had mentioned earlier, that are really interested in history and that are historians or authors or were investigators 30 years ago when it was a much different ball game than it is now with this field being inundated by a lot of people who just feel like maybe they need to be validated through having a hobby where they feel empowered. I'm not sure. It's hard for me to pinpoint. I just know that it's turned into a big industry, maybe through movies as well, like movies that have sort of brought ghost hunting to light. So not just scary and horror movies, but movies that are sort of about paranormal activity and ghost hunters and found footage, filming your own. We have our own YouTube channels now that we film all kinds of stuff with. So then people, of course, will go out looking for Bigfoot with that.
But once again, let's get back to where I was going with this. It's if somebody can make a buck, they'll do anything to make a buck.
Yeah.
How do you validate anything, or where does the responsibility lie when it comes to having so much access to so much information that there's a lot of crap out there, and how is the person who has just gained an interest in, let's say, the paranormal, how are they to know what is real and what is fake? Where does the responsibility of the rest of society lie when it comes to validation? And this is why I look at investigating the paranormal totally different than I would say 99.999% of the people do. I'm an ex-police investigator. We go on fact. We don't go on supposition.
Right.
You cannot conduct an investigation without facts. And you have so many people out there calling themselves investigators. Well, where did you learn how to be an investigator? Oh, on the internet. No.
That's one of the questions that I ask a lot too. One of those ethical, like, are we part of the solution or part of the problem types of questions that I pose a lot when I go places and talk to people with a sense of self-awareness too, that, I make money off of writing books and things like that. And I work in a museum. I come from the museum world. I work in space science. So I definitely see when people also talk about investigation or they talk about scientific equipment.
Yes.
Sometimes I shake my head and I think, that just because it's a gadget doesn't make it science.
I had a guest on the show the other night who claimed to have created the what's it called, Ghost Box, where it multi-band scans.
Yeah.
And I said, no, you didn't. Oh, yes, I did. I said, what you did was you took a design that the Tandy Corporation came up with called the Bearcat Scanner. Oh, you've heard of that? Oh, yeah. Like, why all the attempts on deception?
Well, there's a lot of snake oil to be sold in this industry, just like what you're mentioning. And there are a lot of people who are not well informed. They're not well informed about how to investigate the paranormal, but they're also not well informed about the basics around it. They're not well informed about history or science or any of the basic things. Like, we may come from that angle, but some people are coming from the angle like what you're saying with like just really being interested in paranormal investigation. And they tack on this like, well, I'm going to find the truth kind of like crusade. I'm going to help people. And I don't really personally buy into that.
I went, and I keep asking this question to teams that come on the show and researchers. What what are you looking for, number one? Number two, how are you going to prove that you've actually found what you claim you have found? And
Right.
number three, what happens with that information?
Well, to your point about what you were saying with, the technology, the world of technology being so prevalent at our fingertips, that's probably been the nail in the coffin for any really good evidence, and I'll use evidence in quotation fingers, of the paranormal, because it doesn't matter how good or how grainy a video is, or an EVP or anything. People, skeptics as well as hardcore paranormal investigators alike, are not going to believe what they're seeing anymore. And I also don't think that a bunch of us in the last part of the 20th and first part of the 21st century are going to figure out all the mysteries of life and death, when that's basically been what humans have been wondering about for our entire existence. So I find it very egotistical, too, that we think that we're going to do that with some old radios that, play AM frequencies over and over.
How do you think the transhuman evolution and the possibility of perpetual life is going to affect the paranormal?
I don't have an answer for that. I don't know. I'm very curious myself just to see what happens in the next couple of decades with all of this.
It certainly is going to be very interesting. We're in the Halloween season. It must be busy for you. And
yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, I'm running on fumes. So, right, even at this point in October, I'm already running on fumes. But I do love it.
Do you think that Halloween is the catalyst behind the paranormal?
Like our interest in the paranormal?
Yeah, or the reason why it's kept around. I mean,
right.
The paranormal, because of all the. Well, the way
I don't know.
Yeah, it seems that as you're a child, you're filled with certain myths, and certain myths stick with you. And when it comes to the paranormal, there is no other myth or time of the year more adaptable or more pointed to the belief in the paranormal and life after death than the Halloween season.
That's very true. Well, I wonder, it's also a kitschy time of year in its own way, in its own fun way, which I say with all love. So I don't know anymore if people are as fascinated with Halloween as they are with just year-round with ghostly phenomenon, but I'm sure it's rooted in Halloween for so many of us. Halloween's always been my favorite, so I'm one of them. So
I wonder how come over all the years, especially with the advances in technology, cameras, and the different types of equipment that is being developed for the scientific community as well as the media, why this equipment hasn't been able to film a ghost, film a Bigfoot, a UFO, all the components of the paranormal. One would think that with the advances in photographic equipment, audio equipment, that these finds would have been made by now. I can't understand why they're still evasive unless they don't exist.
Well, I believe they have been, perhaps in bits and pieces, but they're buried in the mounds and mounds and mounds of the nonsense and the bad, the crappy evidence, like what you were saying earlier. And the good stuff is somewhere in there. And there's not a solidified community, especially with the Bigfoot community, let's say, where general, mainstream science is not on board enough to come forward or anything saying that they believe that it could be possible.
Quickly, we've got about a minute and a half here. And first of all, I want to thank you so much for joining us. Great pleasure talking to you.
This was a great conversation. This was refreshing. Thank you.
No, it's I who thank you, because I know you're a very busy lady. You're a great author. But I would like to hear about your Breakfast with Bigfoot.
Yeah, so it's based on a real Bigfoot encounter. I changed the main character, to a little girl to make it kid-friendly, obviously, but it is based on a real Bigfoot encounter that a man claimed to have, where he believed he was kidnapped
Oh, gosh.
overnight by a family of big feet, and then returned safely in the morning. And it was a positive Bigfoot sighting.
Amelia, once again, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's been a great pleasure. To you
Thank you.
and yours, a very happy Halloweeny.
Same to you. Thank you.
You take care of yourself. Now, at X Zone Nation, if you'd like more information about our guest this hour, Amelia Cotter, and don't forget, Cotter is spelled Cotter. That's www.ameliacotter.com. Now, I'll be back on the other side of this commercial break with the news as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. If you'd like to send me an email, xzone at xzoneradiotv.com, on all social media sites, Xzone Radio TV. And to find out about the scheduling that we have available for the Xzone Radio Show and the Xzone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net. And for all the information on the Xzone TV channel, that includes the Xzone Radio TV show, let me see, Mysterious Destinations. We have Freeman Fly, who's joining us, Benjamin Radford, and a host of great people. They're going to be sharing their videos, their views, their beliefs with each and every one of you. And all you have to do is go to the Xzone TV channel that is exclusive to www.simultv.com. I'll be back on the other side of this break as we continue here in the Xzone from our studios and broadcast center in beautiful Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Don't go away.